we're really excited about doing Beyond the Story. It's something new for us. And, we've had a lot of fun thinking about it and thinking about the kinds of questions that will be asked. And we want to thank you for participating. And the genesis of this idea came last year when we launched the Berkeley's Founders Fund, which was a fund that was started when Lance, Tracy, and I somewhat exited from Berkeleyside to join Cityside. And we brought in Pamela Tutine and Zac Farber as the new editors of Berkeleyside. And so we decided that, we thought about what we wanted for Berkeleyside, and good journalism was our main thing that we wanted. So we decided to launch the Berkeleyside Founders Fund to raise money to ensure that we could do some good journalism. And in 2021, we dedicated that fund to investigative reporting. And in 2022, we have another theme, which we will unveil not too long from now. But the Berkeley Founders Fund has made this reporting possible. And we have more stories that are going to happen in the coming months. And I just want to say one thing before I hand it over to Pamela Tutine, is that I really want to thank you, Ally, for participating. As some of you may know or may not know, Ally was born in the Ukraine. And so this has been an extremely difficult week for her. And as usual, Ally has pulled it off with aplomb. She's continued to do reporting. She's also done a first-person story. She's also had to manage what's happening in the world with her friends and relatives in the Ukraine. And I know it's been really difficult. And the fact that you're here, Ally, is fantastic and amazing. And we really want to thank you for doing this. That said, I want to hand it over to Pamela. We were so happy when Pamela applied to be the editor-in-chief of Berkeleyside. She's a Berkeley native. She went to Berkeley High. She has lived in the Bay Area for a long time. She worked at the Bay Area News Group for many, many years and brought to the position a lot of experience. And she and Zac took over in, I guess, around April 1st of last year. So Pamela, please take over.
All right. Well, thanks, Frances, and welcome everyone to our very first Beyond the Story event. Before I hand off to Zac and Ally, I wanted to say just a few words about Founder Fund's stories and how they differ from our daily news cycle. Founder Fund stories, which we may refer to as deep dive stories or enterprise or investigative pieces, are stories that require reporters to spend a lot more time and focus on conducting interviews, digging through files, archives, data sets, and submitting public records requests so that they can craft compelling, impactful stories that affect Berkeley residents. Ideas for these stories come from reporters covering their beats, going to meetings such as City Hall, Board of Education. Nico Savage is our City Hall beat reporter. Emily Ragusa covers crime and safety for us. Ally Markovich, as you know, is our education reporter, and Supriya Yelameli is our housing and homeless reporter. They are all currently working on Founder Fund stories that we hope to publish in the first half of this year. And without going too deep into what those stories are, because the reporters are still kind of fleshing out the details of them, I'll just tell you a little bit about what they are, a few of them, what they are. We're looking at census trends, mapping traffic collisions, the housing pipeline, and crime. We're also looking at fentanyl deaths and the City of Berkeley's ambitious housing plan. So occasionally ideas come to us from our own tip line that you can access on our homepage. We also receive hundreds of emails in the course of a day and many press releases, including one very important one that came to our attention last summer, from a legal team, and that's where this story begins. Zac and Ally will take you through the backstory of how this story came to be and what we also revealed by pressing harder for the details, for more details and information. Zac is Berkeleyside's managing editor. He and I started working here, as Frances said, a year ago in April. He comes from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he was the editor of the Southwest Journal. He's also Ally's direct editor, and he played a major role in helping Ally craft several stories about an alleged sexual assault case at Berkeley High School. Ally was a school teacher before freelancing for Berkeleyside last year. In a short time, though, she has established herself as a dogged reporter who has really honed her reporting skills on the very story we are about to hear. So Zac, take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Pamela, and it's great to be here with you guys. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to jump in. So I know, Ally, in November, you published an investigation showing that Berkeley High had known for 15 years about allegations that chemistry teacher Matthew Bissell had sexually harassed his students, and your investigation revealed that Superintendent Brent Stevens ultimately signed a gag order allowing him to quietly resign from the job. So as Pamela mentioned, this story started from a press release we received in mid-July from Rachel Phillips' legal team. And we found out that Phillips was suing Bissell and the district. And when we found that out in the morning, and we published our first story naming Matthew Bissell that evening. And so we knew that this was something that other news outlets would be covering also, and so there was a real urgency in getting this story out. So to start, Ally, I was hoping you could just describe the first day of reporting on this story. Who did you talk to? What did you learn? And sort of how did you decide what to include and not include just in that first story?
First of all, hi, everybody. I'm Ally, and I'm really happy that we have a small, intimate group so we can have a conversation. And later, I'd like to get to know each of you a little bit. And I'm curious, what you've found important in the story and what questions you have for me about it. So this story, like Pamela and Zac said, came to us in a press release from Rachel Phillips' legal team. And in the press release, we knew immediately that the story was going to break nationally, and national outlets all over the place covered it. But it became immediately clear also that there was so much more to this story than one former student from 20 years ago suing her former teacher. Like in the lawsuit itself and in those initial conversations with Rachel and her attorney, they said that they'd already spoken with several other former students that ranged many years, both around the time that Rachel went there in the 2000s and up until now, people who said that Matt Bissell had also sexually harassed or assaulted them. The problem was, as I was getting all this information, I started interviewing those students too, all in the same day. But we couldn't do anything with that information. We couldn't publish it right away because those specific allegations weren't in the lawsuit itself. And so we consulted with our media lawyer who told us, well, okay, Berkeleyside would be legally liable. We could be sued if we publish these other students' stories without doing our due diligence to corroborate them. So, my gears were turning. I was like, okay, what can we say and what can't we say in this first day? And then what can we pursue later on? I didn't know that it was going to take many months in order to actually be able to tell the stories of all of those other students, that many of whom I talked to on that very first day. And it just goes to show how much effort kind of behind the scenes went into validating and corroborating from many angles what these students said.
Yeah, and also just that first day, we did find out about this Title IX investigation that the district had sent the results of to Rachel Phillips that showed this severe and pervasive pattern of years-long inappropriate behavior. So that was also like a big thing just to find out on this first day. And so we did report on that, even though we couldn't talk about the individual students who Ally was speaking with that day.
Right, like right off the bat, the obvious question was, clearly the school district knew about it. We don't know for how long they knew that students were saying that this teacher was sexually assaulting or harassing them, but they had corroborated in their own investigation that this was happening. And then there's this lawsuit about it. It's like, okay, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. And Ally, can you just back up a little bit and set the stage for everyone about what type of criticism was the school district already facing around issues of sexual harm when this story started? And sort of what's the context for this story?
Yeah, perhaps many of you know this already, but this is definitely not the first time that Berkeley High and Berkeley Unified has come under scrutiny for how it handles sexual assault and sexual harassment. So in the past, there was major walkouts by students in 2020 that were sparked by a lawsuit that was filed by an anonymous student, a Jane Doe, for how the school allegedly handled her attempted rape by another student. Prior to that, years before, there was a lawsuit against a counselor that ended with a settlement saying that this counselor needed to leave the door open when he was meeting with students. That was the terms of the agreement. So there was already a lot of pressure from students and parent advocates who were looking at the district and saying over and over again, you are not doing this right and you're not keeping students safe.
Yeah. So this first story came out in July, and then you wrote another story a few days later talking about the yearbook teacher who discovered this disturbing photo of Matthew Bissell and Rachel Phillips, and sort of how she sort of brought this to light later on. So that was in November, and then it wasn't until 4 months later that your larger investigation into Bissell's career at Berkeley High came together. So can you just talk about sort of what were those 4 months like? How did you work to gather information for that story, and sort of what challenges you faced?
Yes, I'm gonna quiet the area right outside where I am. Just give me 1 second.
The joys of live television, not television.
Apologies. Yeah, I think overall, the following 4 months was an effort to pursue this question that came up within the first day or two of reporting, which was like, how did this happen? How did a school district keep someone employed for so long that had been for years having students complain about his sexual harassment and assault? How does that happen? Why wasn't he fired? Why wasn't he fired sooner? You know, how did he actually leave the district? So that's what I was trying to answer in my reporting, those questions that emerged right away. And the way that I did that was through a kind of winding path of, like, I think I followed many, many roads, some of which led to dead ends, and some of which were incredibly fruitful that led me to be able to report much of the rest of the story. So that included, like, I think, in my opinion, Berkeley has some of the most, I feel like the sources, the people that I talk to here are already so knowledgeable about this topic. And so initially when I started reporting on this, there were already folks who had, for example, like compiled a list of all of the Title IX coordinators at Berkeley High over the last 8 years. They were like, we've been keeping track of this for a long time. Now we're going to give this to you. We entrust you to do something useful with this information. Not only that, but one of the teachers that I spoke with, who I ended up writing a story about, Genevieve Mage, who was one of the teachers who initially saw this yearbook photo of the teacher hugging Rachel Phillips from behind and kind of kissing her ear or something, it looked like. And she saw that photo and couldn't let it go. And she herself started pursuing this really investigation on her own accord for several months before I even talked to her. And she had already reached out to and found other students who said that they sexually harassed and assaulted them. So my research began with talking to this teacher who handed me this list on a silver platter of these were people who were employed at the time at the school district. Speak with them. These are people who say that this teacher did this to them. Go talk to them. See what happens. All that was happening through really relationship building that I've done. outside of that, there was a whole other pursuit, which was trying to get records to prove all of this. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're reporting he said, she said. If you want, I wanted to say, what did the school district actually have on record? What did they actually know? And in order to do that, I tried reaching out to many former administrators, almost all of whom declined to talk to me. I did speak with one former Title IX coordinator who, although she didn't know about this teacher in particular, did enlighten me about what she experienced in terms of the really poor record keeping that was happening in the Title IX office. And that was a piece of information that proved useful to me later on. So what I did immediately, almost immediately after finding out this lawsuit, I filed a public records request with the school district, to which they're legally bound to reply to me, asking for a variety of records that I thought could be useful, ranging from like emails that had this teacher's name in it. That was a really difficult request, to like disciplinary records, to any complaints that students had lodged against him. And all of those records requests were met with denial by the school district. Well, first it was met with delay, and then it was met with denial. And what I had to do was make my requests increasingly specific, like speak with people who knew, what they told me was, well, we can't find this. So I said, okay, let me figure out where I think that these records are lodged and tell you how to find them.
And
right.
I just want to highlight there, the way you did that is because you were having these conversations with these students separately, and they sort of came together there because you had 8 students who had told you they had made complaints about Matthew Bissell's behavior, and then you were able to go to the district and say, hey, I have these eight students who say they've complained. Where are their complaints? Exactly.
And not only did I request them, but the students themselves were willing to write to the school district and say, hey, I made this complaint. I am legally allowed to see what I wrote. Can you produce it to me? And for all but one of those students, the school district said, we're sorry, we can't find this complaint. If you ever made one, we don't know where it is anymore. And that's sort of to the point of the former Title IX coordinator saying that the record keeping was atrocious. And from other students that I've spoken with, even within the last few years, sometimes lodging a complaint with the school district meant an administrator writing something down on a piece of yellow legal paper and it piling up on their desk. And maybe it's found a year later, maybe not. That's one anecdote, and we can't say for sure whether that's true across the board, but it does make sense for explaining why these students couldn't have complaints delivered that they had written delivered back to them.
Mm-hmm. And then the district's response to this was that some of these records were personnel privacy and attorney-client privilege. And I think one of the more striking things is when we ended up getting the separation agreement, one of the lines in the separation agreement was that the separation agreement was subject to a Public Records Act request, which would seem to sort of disprove that argument. So let's just fast forward to sort of once you eventually did get these disciplinary records and the separation agreement, what was your reaction, and sort of and how did you sort of process this? And the big question is just, why was Bissell allowed to keep teaching for so long despite students' many complaints about his behavior?
Well, if you don't mind, as like pivoting slightly from the script, but I'm just wondering, since we're going to be talking about outcome and we've been talking about process, like I wonder if you all have any questions about how all of this came together, and how we eventually got our hands on the information, or how we were prevented from doing so, et cetera. Do you guys have anything you're wondering about what we've already talked about?
And feel free to unmute to ask questions, because we're a small enough group that we can do that.
Well, Ally, it sounds like you like to talk about how, Berkeleyside was willing to say it would go to court in order to get these records. So I think you should tell that story.
Miranda had a question, Francis.
Yeah, that was just actually my question, Francis, which was just to follow up on specifically, how did Ally, how did you get your hands on the disciplinary and separation documents after being essentially stonewalled for so long?
Eventually, honestly, it was a really frustrating process because every time I filed a records request, I said, okay, this is it. This is the one that they're going to respond to and finally give me this information. And I was getting really impatient, honestly. And in consulting with the folks on our staff and our media lawyer, it's like, okay, what can we do to actually get this? And Tom, our media lawyer, what he said was like, you need to be as confident as you possibly can that these records exist. If you can be 100% confident or 99% confident, then if we go to court, we know that we're going to be successful. And this is it's more of a surefire suit, right? So ultimately, like it was a combination of like me getting more information to ask increasingly specific things. Like I didn't know exactly what the separation agreement was called or exactly like what the disciplinary records might have been called. I learned those things and I asked for those. And then on Berkeleyside's end, it was like a meeting with, I think everybody who's here on the team and just saying, okay, I, through my reporting, am confident that these things exist. I don't just think that. Will you stand behind this if we need to go to court? Is that something that you're willing to do? And I think everyone unanimously said, absolutely, yeah. And so what we did was Tom, our lawyer, sent an email saying, we've asked for these things this amount of times. At this point, like you're legally required to provide us this. And if you don't, we'll sue, essentially. And here's a deadline. And they fulfilled their response with a minute or two to go.
Nice.
Yeah, up to the deadline.
Ally, how long are we talking about? Can you just give a sense of the time, how long you waited, the time frame for all this?
4 months, right, Zach?
Mm-hmm. It came out, I think they turned them over on November 11th when we first requested them around July, I think 17th.
Yeah.
And then just once you did sort of finally get them, so what was sort of your reaction to those documents and what was in them?
So, I mean, in some ways, what was interesting was that in some ways it confirmed like what we already knew, right? It confirmed that the school district was aware of this man allegedly harassing all these female students over the years. We just didn't know the details, right? So we found out that there had been complaints from students about him for 15 years. But as we saw with those students who couldn't find their complaints back, they weren't like written down, or if they were written down by the students, the school district didn't lodge them anywhere permanent. So there's record, what the disciplinary record show was the first time that Matt Bissell was formally disciplined was in 2015. In that disciplinary note, it says, you've been coached on this in 2006, and you were coached on this in 2007 and 2008, et cetera, right, for these many years. And to that, Bissell responded, where is evidence of that? Because I don't remember that, right? And because the school district, according to those documents, didn't have records of administrators coaching him, they didn't have a leg to stand on, right? So it can be really challenging to fire a teacher in California and in general, even when they've done something really egregiously wrong. And in this case, like, or really in all cases, it's a lot easier to do so when you have, crossed your T's and dotted your I's, and you have records of not only what they've done wrong, but what you've done to try to correct the behavior. And for a long time, at least for 9 years, though likely longer, given that Rachel Phillips photo was in 2001, like, this was going on. He was being coached, but it wasn't being formally recorded. That really changed in 2015 and 16, when the principal, Kristen Glencher, tried to really put into writing and put, like, in effect, there were no real consequences, in the sense that, like, he still was able to just teach, and he just had to attend like a training on sexual harassment. So in that sense, he wasn't punished, but there was formal documentation, and he was reprimanded by the school district in 2015 and 16. Yeah.
And what do you think it is that made it so difficult for the district to punish him beyond these ways? And sort of, as you reported the stories, of what came as a surprise in terms of how the district was thinking about this?
I mean, I do think it was surprising to me that the school district couldn't find those records. Like, that to me, I didn't expect. Like, I knew that there was, according to my sources, disorganized record keeping, but that did shock me. I think something else that really came as a surprise to me was that ultimately the agreement that they came to was that Bissell would leave Berkeley Unified, but that they wouldn't tell anybody what he had done, right? That's what a gag order is. That when a future employer, say another school district, would call, they would just get essentially directory information. He worked from this time to this time, and nothing about the alleged sexual assaults. And when I found that out, and I told that to some of the students who said that he had harassed and assaulted them, they were horrified. They said, oh, so that just means he can go on and do this elsewhere. And when I talked to the school board president and to the superintendent, not about this case in particular, because they legally wouldn't do that, but just about these cases in general, they really thought that they were doing the right thing. In their mind, if the choice, again, in general, they were speaking in general, like, if the choice is between initiating a process to fire a teacher that may or may not be successful versus coming to an agreement that lets them leave, at least the second one gets them out of the classroom, right? That was their logic. And I, as a reporter, it was my duty to kind of represent their argument to the kind of, and put it in the best light, like give their strongest argument. And so what I had to do was tell that to students who said that this teacher had sexually harassed and assaulted them. And so I went about calling all these students and saying, well, what do you think about this decision? And this is how the school board president and the superintendent defended it. And the superintendent and the school board president didn't have to do that. They didn't have to call up these alleged victims and say, well, this is our justification. Like, doesn't this make you feel good? And I had to have those conversations with them, and it was awful, honestly. And those people were horrified at the decision that was made, and that he could feasibly continue teaching elsewhere, regardless of the kind of pros and cons that the school district kind of internally was facing on the level of like a business, I suppose. It was really hard to communicate that. And some of the like most powerful quotes in the story came out of me saying, well, this is their argument. And these people are saying, what? That absolutely doesn't make sense. And in fact, like, I'm really angry that you're even telling me this right now. And, the superintendent didn't do that, and neither did members of the school board.
Yeah, you're really talking to a bunch of people who were not talking to each other. and sort of the only dialogue kind of in some way was in the story.
Yeah, I think that's one like really odd thing about being a reporter, is that you hear all these different perspectives, and those people very rarely speak to one another.
Yeah, well, I mean, in that vein, sort of, there was another person's perspective, and sort of what efforts did you make to reach Matthew Bissell directly? Why do you do that as a reporter, and sort of to what extent were you successful?
Yeah, so anytime that you make a claim about somebody, you have to give them the chance to respond, no matter who it is, right? In this case, I tried reaching out to Matt Bissell in just about every way you could think of: LinkedIn, Facebook message, trying phone numbers that I found online for him, trying the school district email, which by that point was defunct. And then also I visited his house a number of times with Pamela and with Zac, in which we knocked on the door, left a note type of thing. Ultimately, he didn't want to respond. And in some ways that was nerve-wracking, right? Because we were making all these allegations and we didn't get to hear from him trying to defend himself. What we did find, though, was two things that we put into the story, which was, one, in his disciplinary record, teachers, when they're disciplined, are allowed to respond. And in each of the cases that he was disciplined, he wrote a letter explaining himself and responding to the claims. So if the school district and the principal wrote, all these students are saying that you are staring at their chests, he would say, that's not where I'm looking, or that type of thing, right? And so he included the arguments that he made, saying, this isn't what I was doing at all. And the other thing that we found was, through a Public Records Act request, a former teacher of his, a former co-teacher who had worked with him in the same classroom, a female teacher who said, I'd never seen this man do anything wrong, and I'd never heard of anything wrong. So we included her statement as well. And I tried to reach out to her too, but she didn't want to speak. And then kind of at the last minute, Matt Bissell's attorney responded, strongly denying, saying that he strongly denied any of the claims that were being made against him.
And it was a relief to receive that response from the attorney right before publication. Is there always more legal risk if you don't have any type of response? So Ally, could you just talk a little bit about the reaction the story has received? And I mean, you've actually written a number of stories, and just what have students at the center of the story been saying? What's the community been saying? And sort of what efforts are being made to prevent sexual misconduct against students in the future?
So as I was reporting this story, it did eventually come out in a kind of major investigation piece in November, but there was also a lot of stories along the way. And between those stories and pressure from students and parents all throughout the fall, the school district had announced incremental changes throughout that entire time. So by the time that this investigation was published, the district had promised to make a number of changes and had already implemented several of them. So when we talked about, for example, those student records being completely disorganized, according to sources that I've talked to, the school district ended up purchasing an online database specifically for this, which seems kind of basic, but is really important for you to be able to look up a student and say, or another individual and say, okay, how many complaints have been made against this one person? Before purchasing this, the school district didn't have an easy ability to do that. So that was a really important change. In addition to a number of internal kind of watchdog mechanisms, I guess you could call, they re-energized a parent group that happened. They started meeting with a student sexual harassment advisory group. So there was a number of changes that the school district already started putting in place that were really positive. And then on top of that, once this story came out, there was, I think, a really widespread response from the community, and some of our city council members like Terry Taplin in particular, responded kind of condemning the situation. And he actually sent a letter to our legislator saying, look at this situation. Not only do we need to prevent this from happening to other students, but we also need to make it easier for the media to be able to access this information. Like, not every newsroom has the time and energy and is willing to stand behind a lawsuit in order to get one person's disciplinary record, right? Berkeleyside was, and we're lucky for that, but not every community has that. And so Terry messaged some of our legislators about this, and Buffy Wicks did respond that she was willing to look into legislation to improve both of those things. Buffy Wicks now is chair of the Housing Committee and hasn't proposed any legislation to that effect, but I think that it's positive that it did at least receive this attention from the state. And I think, you know, we'll see where it goes from there is all we can say.
Mm-hmm. One other thing we didn't really get to, but we did to some extent, but I mean, I know you interviewed more than a dozen students who told you stories about their interactions with Matthew Bissell, and they did sort of form something of a community. And I was wondering if you could just sort of talk about those students and some of the relationships you've built and sustained with them, and sort of what that relationship is like for you as a reporter to have this relationship with these people who've had real harm while you're in sort of this other role.
Yeah, well, first I'll just say that if you all didn't know, that Rachel Phillips actually filed the lawsuit in the first place because she knew that there were other students who said that he had sexually harassed or assaulted them. She thought it was, you know, limited to her, but when she learned that this was going on, and when she found out about these other students, she said, okay, I need to do something about this. This is my responsibility now. And so in some ways, it is those like connections between those alleged victims that spurred this whole thing to get started. And I can't say that a lot, like I played a major role in facilitating the connection between people, but from publishing the initial story and stories about this, some folks were encouraged to reach out to me, who then reached out to one another, right? For instance, I know one teacher at Berkeley High who read this, who had a student somewhat recently who asked for his help transferring out of a class that Bissell was teaching that the student was in. He remembered that, contacted her and was like, hey, if you want to, you should get involved with this and you know, do this to help other people. And I think that was one of the most like touching conversations I had, was like the sense of pride that came from that former student who graduated just a couple of years ago, who was really afraid to be involved in the story at first, and then was really glad that she spoke out, like for herself and for other people. So yeah, there was a lot of really touching moments like that, but also difficult to navigate, because on the one hand, like I'm listening to them and I'm being an empathetic ear, but I'm also asking them to recount this horrible thing that happened to them. And like, I want them to be in the story if they want to be in it, and not if they don't. So yeah, it's complicated, but I think also being a young woman myself really changed the interactions that I was having with those folks. Like, I think it would be really different if I was, you know, of a different gender and much older, right?
Ally, there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'll sort of give you both of them, and you can choose how you go. So Dan asks, what was the position or response from the Berkeley Federation of Teachers? You haven't mentioned that. And then the second from Hillary. Hillary wonders if this database tool that the school district invested in, is it possibly vaporware? Can you really, might the new board president or the district give you some visibility in that to see, is it a really serious thing?
Yeah, I think I could be totally wrong. I think it's called Guardian, but I'm slightly blanking on it. I did report on it. And the cool thing is that I like reached out to the someone at the company itself, and they like gave me a tour of how the online database works. And from my perspective, like it's a tool like any other, like it has a lot of capacity, but they need to use it, and they need to use it right. So in my mind, I think the tool that they purchased was excellent. I am obviously not an expert in Title IX databases, but it seemed great. But it needs to be used correctly in order to be effective.
What about the Berkeley Federation of Teachers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Ultimately, I think there was a like very brief comment in support of students, like formally, like supporting students who had experienced sexual assault or harassment on campus. And they like said that they stand with those students or former students. Yeah, I can't say much more in detail on like what their stance is. I did have a number of conversations about this with some folks at the union, like some of which I'm not at liberty to share. But maybe if you ask a more like specific question than that, I could potentially say, yeah.
And you ended up quoting something from their policy book, I think, in the story. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think ultimately, like, I think a lot of people like pointed their fingers at like the entire school board. What I learned was that the school board isn't privy to this kind of information, like until it reaches a certain level, like until they're trying to terminate or dismiss or come to a settlement agreement. The school board is, except for like parents contacting them, uninvolved in the process. From the union perspective, they, in like their agreement with the school district, they don't have written out like discipline procedures for this sort of thing. So at least like formally speaking, the school district is like determining whether or not they're going to like come to a separation agreement. Like a teacher always has a representative from the union with them, that's like advocating for them. But yeah.
Did anyone else have any questions? Or since it is such a small group, maybe we could hear from some of you, and just if you want to introduce yourselves and talk about any of your thoughts about the story or sort of other Berkeleyside stories you'd like to hear more about. Miranda?
Unmute.
I think you're muted, Miranda.
Yeah, sorry. I was just starting to type it out, but it's actually faster to talk. First of all, congrats, Ally, on a great story and great work, and to the whole Berkeleyside team for supporting you as you delved into this story. I'm a little curious as to what the status of the lawsuit is at this point, and also because I remember reading some of the stories, but I don't remember every detail of what you reported. What is this former teacher, Matthew Bissell, what is he doing now? Has he gone on to work at other school districts or not? I'm curious what his status is.
Yeah, to answer the second question, so when this happened, one thing the school district did do right, and which it's legally obligated to do, is report this to the California Teacher Credential Commission. And so we know that Matt Bissell is under investigation and has been for a while. If they're like one potential outcome is that on his credential, it could come back with a red flag, and that would be assigned to any school district that wants to hire him, that says, you know, there's been some wrongdoing here on this person's part. That hasn't happened yet. There's no red flag and his credential remains clear. I know like immediately after he was put on leave at BUSD, he got a job as a substitute, and we found out because one of his former students was teaching at a charter school in Oakland, an elementary school, and she saw him substituting and she was like, wait, oh my God, I recognize this person. He looks like my former chemistry teacher. And sure enough, she like looked at the sub sheet that day and, you know, there was his name. So he was able to find a job as a substitute. Now that was before all of this went public. That was before the lawsuit was filed and before these stories have been written. I imagine on a local level, it would be more challenging for him to find work in education now. Yeah, I do know that his wife, who also works in education, has like gotten a position in another state somewhat recently. So I don't know, make of that what you will.
Did you, sorry, Ally, did you, just to follow up on that, did you say that because of the reporting and stories that that the school district then indeed, as they were required to legally put this information into the sort of, what I'm forgetting the terms, but the California.
Yeah, it's like the California Teaching Credential Commission, and they did that right away. Like in the terms of the separation agreement, they said like, we're gonna, you know, part ways and we won't tell any other employers about what you did, or what you allegedly did, but we will report you to the California Teaching Credential
So
Commission.
they
Like
did
specified
do that. They did do
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
It's a process before the California Teacher Credential does anything. And so there's like this liminal state in that process.
And the lawsuit?
Yeah. I think that it's just like in the legal floating state. I think they're like, you know, negotiating and whatnot. Nothing's been resolved. You know, remains to be seen what happens there.
Before we wrap up, Ally, one final question from Hillary.
And there's also Dan. Sorry, Dan has his hand raised.
Oh, right. Okay. Good job on the hand raising move, Dan.
Dan, do you want to just go ahead?
Yeah.
Sure. In the very early part of this, starting 2002, 2003, there was enormous turnover at Berkeley High in terms of principals. And I just wondered to what extent, and then there was less turnover, and then there was more turnover, and then there was less turnover over that period of time. And I wondered to what extent that had anything to do with it. Also, there was a substantial period of time in which there was, let's say, a weaker superintendent, and during 8 years in this period. And I just wonder what those, because the board really wouldn't get involved in something like this until it works its way through staff, and the board's sort of pretty removed. And I'm just wondering to what extent that had anything to do with this.
No, I think that's such a good point. I think it has a lot to do with it. I spoke with an attorney for, I think I mentioned earlier in our conversation, a lawsuit with a student that's Jane Doe versus Berkeley Unified School District about attempted rape. So recently I was talking to that attorney, and she was saying, you know, well, there's been actually a lot of positive changes at the school district, but with the superintendent leaving, like, who knows, you know, what the new superintendent's approach is going to be to this issue. And she thinks that could really be crucial because, as we said, like, you know, there might be positive systems in place, but we don't know whether like those will be utilized and fulfilled by the next superintendent. And so, yeah, that turnover makes a huge difference. I think like what we saw in those disciplinary records was at every entry, every few years, this teacher had a different supervisor, and that supervisor had a different supervisor above them. And so if there was someone who was taking it seriously, like it seemed that Kristen Glencher was, you know, she was not there within just a few years. So had there been one consistent person who was, you know, hard on this over many years, and that I think it could have been potentially a really different story. Yeah, I think you bring up a really kind of crucial point in all this.
So the question from Hillary in the chat is, what role might you play in interviewing the new school board president on this topic? And then what involvement might you be reporting on with the process for the board in searching for a new superintendent?
Yeah, I think that it's really important for reporters to dig in to the history of the candidates that apply for the important positions at our school district and that affect our kids in particular. And that's not something I've actually done very much of personally, covered in an election or something like that. But we have on our staff many people who have, including Francis. And I'm like thinking about, your piece on Wayne, who ran for mayor and, managed to spin his campaign into something that like really glossed over his involvement in this, animal rights group. So yeah, I think speaking generally, Hillary, in having new folks around, it's important to push, on these topics and on their kind of previous stances on it, et cetera.